listeners, watchers, anywhere you can ingest this podcast. Maybe eating it, I don't know, or drinking, that might be the end goal one day. This is the Fixins podcast, the podcast that I'm starting along with my blog. Still getting our feet off the ground and everything. And when I say we, I mean me. Getting feet off the ground with our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Check us out there at Fitz's Fixins podcast. Just at Fitz's Fixins for that. But yeah, this is the first episode. With this, I plan on releasing something every month or so, depending on how my schedule and schedules of those align with things. This is our very first edition. We will be having Ryan Kearney, the general manager from Old House Vineyards in Culpeper, Virginia, one of the very first Virginia vineyards I ever visited. And I was lucky enough to get some time with him to sit down via Zoom and talk about what it's like being Virginia's first trifecta, which brewery, winery, and distillery, and kind of what that journey's been like for him as he graduated from UVA and then his transition with the family to helping run Old House Vineyards. But yeah, that's kind of the goal with this podcast. I want to sit down with people in the industry, whether that's winemakers, that's proprietors, chefs, restaurant owners, anything in that kind of realm, and just talk to them and have a casual conversation and talk about what makes them love what they're doing, what got them into it all, and just kind of more casual with it. I don't want it kind of a face-to-face formal interview like you would necessarily have on a newspaper or a story like that. More casual, sit back and just really talk about their love, because to be in this industry, I know you have to really love it, and there has to be a story behind it. I want to learn all of their stories, and Ryan was gracious enough to be kind of my guinea pig subject on it. I referenced that a couple times in the interview, and I am so thankful that he was able to kind of take time out of his day and do something that, who knows where this will turn up in just a couple of years, weeks, who knows what will happen with this. And I hope you guys enjoy it, listening wherever you can find it on podcast, distributing it through Anchor, so maybe Spotify, maybe some iTunes. Not really sure on all of that. But yeah, go ahead, sit back, relax, put in your headphones, your earbuds, AirPods. I don't know. I don't have AirPods, so. But enjoy this podcast coming at you. Ryan Kearney from the Old House Vineyards. Enjoy. First off, what is your kind of title at Old House, and how did you get involved? I know it's a family-run experience there, so how did you go from where you started on your first day with the family to today?
Yeah, so I've been back full-time here at Old House for a little over 5 years now. It might be 6 years now. I graduated in 2013 from the University of Virginia, and then went up to DC as a Beltway bandit for about a year and a half. But while I was up there, that's when we started the Distillery project. And I was doing the licensing for that while I was up there. And when someone needed to come back full time to start doing that, I was at the point where I was ready to leave DC. I did not expect to come back here in a full-time capacity in any respect. It was sort of a transition to until I sort of figured out what I wanted to actually do back in DC. But to this point, I haven't left yet. So I don't have any plans to disappear anytime soon. There's always something interesting going on here. We have a lot of new projects in the works. The aspect that, we get to actually, what we want to do, we get to put into place almost immediately is very appealing to me. But right now, I essentially act in the role of a miscellaneous / general manager. We have a full-time brewer, we have a full-time winemaker, we have a full-time distiller too. Pretty much what I like to think of myself as is production logistics and brand management. So if it's going to affect someone's viewpoint on Old House, hopefully that has somehow passed by me in some regard.
So being kind of the miscellaneous general manager, the brand manager, everything like that, what is your day-to-day? I imagine it's probably a different thing every single day. What is your day-to-day kind of like in the terms of all of that?
So it changes quite dramatically, especially if we're talking what this week has been like versus this month versus the 11 months prior to that. But today was spent. The morning was spent with 4 hours bottling hand sanitizer. We've been doing that from the distillery aspect in partnership with the town of Culpeper. Then it followed up with a couple different Zoom conference calls with various organizations around the state. And then it jumped into a Adopt a Vine program that we're working on with tourism. And then pretty much we prepped for planting new vines, which starts tomorrow morning before it rains. So we'll be putting probably 1,000 vines in tomorrow and another 3,000 vines in over the course of the next week and a half.
Wow, that's a lot of vines. Is that perfect? That's what I like to hear. Is that a lot of vines for this year, or is that kind of on average with what you guys normally plant? I really have no idea what the normal planting of it all is.
Yeah, so acreage is sort of it's a funny question in Virginia because everyone will have sort of their own answer to when someone comes to the winery. How many acres of grapes do you have planted here? There's not a specific number of vines that will be answered in that question. Every vineyard is going to be a little bit different. And so to give you a bit of an idea, we have about 32 acres of vines here on the property spread over 8 different varietals right now. And that's pretty much the plantable space that we have on the property. There's a lot of open ground area, but due to clay, shale, parking lots, we can't really plant there anymore. And so 32 acres is sort of where we top out. With that being said, when we first planted the vineyard, our spacing was 5 feet in between every vine, so you have a lot of room. I like to think of vines as sort of like trees. The vine behind you in your picture looks like it's one of those almost 5 acre or 5 foot spacing.
Yeah, I think that's about how much room I have in front of me to the next vine, because I'm sitting in the midst of these vines right now.
Which look really good. A vine is going to be like, a vine, a weed. It is going to spread out as far as you're going to give it room to grow. And so if you are looking for really a high yield and you have a variety that can hold a lot of fruit, like a Vidal Blanc, a Chamberson, a lot of your hybrid varietals, you're able to give it some more room and put out a lot of fruit. What we've been doing over the course of the last 5-6 years has been trying to move that 6 foot planting space to about 2 to 3 feet. And what that does is instead of your arm in both directions spanning 3 feet, it spans 1.5 feet. And so your total harvest is going to remain the same. You're not going to get more fruit out of doing this, but you're going to have fewer clusters on each vine. So all that energy that goes into growing gets put into that fruit. So theoretically, the quality of your fruit with fewer clusters is going to be of a better quality than it would have been with double the clusters on the vine. And so most of our planting right now has been interplanting in the vineyard.
Okay. When did you guys first start planting on the property?
So the property was purchased in 1998, and the first vines were put in the ground in 1999. My dad, Patrick, his day job is in millwork and museum exhibits, and so what he does for a living is he builds museums up and down the East Coast. He's been doing that for almost 40 years now. our family was originally from Fairfax. We lived by the Vienna metro area, and his shop was located up there. And he had helped build the original Culpeper History Museum, which is the town that we're located in. And so he's sort of familiar with the area. And this property had just shown up for sale by owner one day in the paper. 75 acres, had been abandoned for about a decade. And so he came out with all of us on Mother's Day, because that's what mom wants to do, travel around.
Yeah, he wants to go to a farm, an abandoned 10-year-old farm on Mother's Day.
Exactly, exciting. And so the at the edge of the property is where you had to park, because it was introvertible. You grass that was taller than, I guess we were kids, but taller than we were. And so he ended up actually buying the property that day on the back of a napkin. The idea was that the guys at his shop come down and hunt and fish, sort of blow off some steam. With the millworking business comes sort of individuals that like to go hunting and fishing on the weekends. But no one ever made it down. No one in our family really hunts or fishes, and so it turned to Plan B, which was Dad trying out his green thumb. And so that has its whole sort of own backstory behind it. Old Dominion was actually a winery, a co-op that existed around this area back in the mid-90s. And it was something that was just really ahead of its time, talking about 50,000 gallon wine tanks, something that would not look out of place in the middle of Napa. But Virginia just wasn't ready for that kind of production. And so it went out of business. And Dad had stopped there for a wine tasting one day, and got to talking to one of the guys there as they were closing down. He's like, "Oh, you have some property, you should plant some vines." And that's how it sort of spiraled out of control. And it has been a learning curve and evolution ever since.
And from day one, you guys have now added a brewery, a distillery, and you just talked about what you guys are doing with the vines and everything. What spurred the idea to kind of move from winery and enhance that to then go to the brewery and then go to the distillery? Like, why did you guys want to have those three things, which I imagine all are very hands-on, very like in-depth things all at once?
Sure. So a lot of our expansion projects started about 9-10 years ago. Not to say that we were a hobby winery by any means, but after about 10 years of doing it, it was like, okay, I guess we're going to be here for a little while. It's time to start putting some trying to improve the sort of consistency of everything from year to year. Go beyond this family is sort of fun and nice people, we should go visit and support them, to being like, hey, they have a quality product that is worth drinking as well. And so that's about the same time we started doing weddings here on the property. And the weddings, sort of the cash infusion from that, allowed us to reinvest that back into sort of other expansion projects. But the reason that the distillery started was actually because of our port style wines, the fortified wines, that you need a brandy. You're adding alcohol to your wine, keeping the sugar content high, bringing the alcohol content up. Distilleries or wineries do not have a license to distill their own booze. And so even if you're doing your own port on site, you need to bring in that alcohol from elsewhere. And so Belmont Farm is the distillery that's located about 15 minutes from us. And they are the first legal moonshine distillery in the United States. They've been there since 1980. They have one of the largest copper stills that predates Prohibition. It is massive. It's a very neat operation. It's definitely worth visiting. Really nice people. And so we had sent our wine to them for a while. They would distill it and send it back. And the whole idea is you're able to make a port completely from grapes on your own property. Because as much as we can grow here and you can drink here off the property, that's sort of what our intention is. But if you've ever seen the show Moonshiners on the Discovery Channel, that show is shot in large part out of Belmont Farm Distillery.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so about when that show is starting, they got a tiny bit busy and weren't able to offer that distillation service anymore. But at that time too, we're talking about 8 years ago now. There's only 4 distilleries in the state of Virginia. Now there's about 60. It's really exploded. And so those other 3 distilleries at the same time also stopped offering their distillation service to wineries across the state. There's a couple reasons for that. But the primary reason is brief chemistry here. Stills are made of copper. The reason that stills are made of copper for 2 reasons. The one, they're really good conductors of heat transfer. So you need whole point of distillation is you're heating up a liquid, extracting the alcohol vapor because it has a lower boiling point than water. So copper conducts heat really well. The second thing is it removes sulfur. And so you need to remove sulfur from your fermentation. Otherwise, it smells like eggs at the end of it. And no one wants to drink something that smells like rotten eggs. And so the wine that was being sent to these distilleries is generally has a very high sulfur content because nobody is turning their good wine into spirits, because it takes about 8 bottles of wine to make 1 bottle of booze. And so if you can sell 8 bottles of wine at your own winery, you're going to want to do that. So the wine that's being sent to these 4 distilleries is generally wine that you don't want to bottle under your label. It has some kind of defect. You've been sitting on it for a couple of years, or a new winemaker has come in and they're like, oh, I don't want to use so-and-so's wine from the previous year because it's not nearly as good as my wine that I'm going to make. And so every once in a while, the winemaker has a slight ego. You have to massage that. And so, but also, especially from a financial standpoint, really painful having to dump a couple 100 gallons of wine down the drain. You also don't want to put out a bad product because that reflects on you. But and so a lot of this wine just put in a barrel and you're going to figure out you'll do something with it later on down the road. In order to prevent the wine from oxidizing and completely turning to vinegar, you add sulfur, which is your preservative. All this wine that has had excessive amounts of sulfur put in over the years, being sent to these distilleries, that sulfur is destroying the copper stills. And so these distilleries whose livelihood is grain-based products for whiskey, and we're only sort of doing this on the side as a favor, small amount of income. It just wasn't worth it for them anymore to do it because it was destroying their equipment, which tends to be expensive. And so about 7 years ago, the distilleries put out a notice they were no longer doing it. And so we decided that we would do it ourselves. And our thought process, our model was 250 wineries or so in the state at that time. Most of them did dessert wine. Instead of having them bring in alcohol from California, we would do the distillation for the wineries. We would build our stills specifically to deal with that sulfur. And then everyone could have a product made on their own, from their own grapes. And we could, most importantly, do our own. But we were the first winery distillery at that time, and so there's some red tape to go through. And it took us about 2 years to get the license. And so by the time we'd gone through all that, it was like, okay, we're gonna make our own booze as well.
Might as well.
That was your long-winded story of how we got to the distillery. It was because of the port-style wines. And then we took a class out in Seattle in order to try to learn about it a little bit more, sort of, how to do it. And
the important part of it.
We met another individual that was taking the class, Keith Valerio, was out there, and he ended up living in Manassas, even though we were taking this course out in Seattle. And it was like, hey, instead of, starting your own place, why don't you just sort of jump on board with us? And so he's been with us pretty much since day one.
Is he like the master distiller or craft distiller with you guys now?
Yep. Yes, he is.
Oh,
Yep.
that's a funny way of meeting him. What are the odds that he'd be out in Seattle with you guys? That's very interesting.
There's only 12 people in the class, so
Even less so. So what? I'm not. I'm I was a journalism major in school. I wasn't a math major, so I'm not going to crunch those numbers quickly. But out of all the wineries in Virginia, how many of them do you distill their port style wines for?
Yeah, so originally we were going to be thinking that we were doing a lot of them, but we probably work with about 20 on an annual basis, mostly in the Charlottesville and Loudoun area. And then that all generally comes in that September to January after harvest months, and then the rest of the year we're pretty much focusing on our own product.
Okay, which types of products do you guys make out of your distillery?
So we do a vodka from grapes, actually grape skins. So if you're familiar with grappa, sort of our recycled seasonal version, not quite as fruity, not quite as harsh, a little bit smoother, a little bit sweeter.
Okay.
And so we pretty much take 300,000 pounds of grape pomace, the refuse after each harvest season from not only our winery, but wineries all over the area, and re-ferment it and make a recycled vodka out of it each year. We are about to release our first brandy, which is our sort of bourbon equivalent. It has been bottled. It is going through label approval. So we'll see when that comes through. But that one is at about 5 years old. Whenever it does eventually make it to our sales counter, it will be Virginia's oldest brandy because we are the only producers of it. We do a whiskey, which we age in our port barrels from the winery. We do a Virginia version of a tequila. Can't call it tequila though because we're making it in Culpeper, not in Mexico. And then we do a couple different spice rums, a citrus spice rum, a cinnamon and nutmeg, a classic spice rum. And we do a coffee rum as well.
That's a lot.
And most of those products are non-grain based because originally we weren't built to do grains. It required different infrastructure. We needed sugar sources that were readily available. Molasses, grapes, and agave all have their own high sugar source that is easier to work with than grains based on the equipment we had. So we sort of went into our own route there as well.
That's interesting. So with the distillery you have, winery, let's talk a little bit about the brewery. What was the idea behind getting the brewery going?
So the brewery, part of it was just, hey, we almost have everything. Why not have the other one? But we'll give the credit to my sister and brother-in-law. And so my sister was a nurse at UVA hospital at the time. And my brother-in-law, Josh, was completing his residency at UVA. And so he'd always been a big home brewer. And so him and a couple of his doctor buddies would come back on the weekends and we brew 5-gallon batches of beer in the distillery. There's a pretty funny video of one time because he had 6 of his buddies there as we were bottling 50 bottles on the ground, and there's like $7 million worth of doctor's education sitting on the concrete floor, sitting Indian style around these 50 bottles. And it's like, and this is all they want to do, is get these 50 bottles, and they all have their gloves on. They're all constantly sanitizing everything. And it's like, okay, well, I guess that's, the good concept. Beer needs to be very clean. But they ended up moving to Kentucky. And I think part of Dad's master plan to, bring the family back closer to home was, hey, we'll start we're putting the brewery concept together. Not that you can give up your day job of being a doctor, but you can come back, consult on the weekends, maybe do a couple of brews, and so that kicked off the brewery, which was the brewery that so I'm sitting in the brewery right now on one side of it, but the project is definitely the most ambitious that we've had to date. This was, if you look on Google Maps, last time I looked, it still hadn't been updated from about 3 years ago, and so you can see the dairy barn that was located here that burned down in the 1960s. And so we were originally going to use the foundation of the dairy barn and do this sort of stall, very pub or pole barn type thing out here. Then we had a really bad storm that came through and it wiped out the rest of the foundation. So it's sort of a blessing in disguise. So we ended up building this building on top of the original footprint. Instead of pea gravel and outdoors, it became a 14,000 square foot facility and house 400 people at any given time, with the idea that we could do live music, sort of a concert series here. There's a 21 and up section. There's a family, kids, music, TVs, everything goes section, which was quite interesting. The dynamic when we opened the pub side about a year later. 3 months before everything shut down, but people really seemed to enjoy having a 21 and up side. It didn't people didn't feel shunned that they couldn't go in there because there's a side for everyone. But the first couple weeks was a little bit worried because it's like, okay, on the one side it's all calm and intimate, and on the other side there's naked children running around with their shoes on, because now it's like wait a second, now there's this feeling like, oh, this is the side that we can whatever goes over here.
This is the free-for-all side, and this is the not free-for-all side. That's funny. That'd be an interesting dynamic.
It was. It's like everyone that's working at the brewery on any given day. It's like okay, am I playing babysitter today, or am I on the other side?
Am I on the good side, or do I have to handle a 2-year-old trying to steal their parents' beer? That'd be an interesting kind of roulette almost.
Mm-hmm.
Going into work every day.
And then it's always like, wait a second, didn't I see like half the family is going to the 21 side and half the family is leaving their family with the kids on the other, and it's like, So,
I would definitely be the one leaving the family to get away from the kids to get to the 21 and up section. But
it's like, oh, I can't hear you. I'm on the other side.
Sorry, this wall, this fakeness wall right here, it's separating us from each other. So going to Old House, what could you kind of expect from it in terms of tasting, and how do the tastings work for each, the winery, brewery, and distillery? Is it one fell swoop? Because I think when the last time I was at Old House was a couple of years back when I did a tasting. It was actually for my 21st birthday. That was like my big thing. I was like, I want to go wine tasting. So we went to a couple, and Old House was one of them. I don't know if the distillery was quite open yet, but how does it work now today? Or should I say in 3 months when the world's back to hopefully normal?
Yeah, so they all have their own separate facilities. We do serve both wine and beer at the brewery location. But if you want the full wine tasting, it's out of one of the bars over at the winery, either inside the 1800s farmhouse or when it's nice on the back patio outside. The distillery is an ABC store, so all the spirits have to be kept and consumed in there. We are building a deck off the side to start doing cocktails in a limited fashion for that as well. And then you wrap around to the brewery, which is behind it. You can do beer flights over there. You can also get the glasses and bottles of wine. We actually launched our new website, which included everything for the first time as we tried to get out of the 20th century technology. That was our old website. But the starting in April, we were supposed to start launching our trifecta tours. So our sort of dynamic has changed a little bit over the last year, because the brewery really did bring in a lot more people.
Mm-hmm.
And and it has been good in the fact that we are a little bit worried when, as we were beginning to open the brewery, was, are we just going to have, the same people, but now all the winery people that, used to go to the winery are just going to hang out over the brewery, and the winery is going to be forgotten. Luckily, that wasn't the case. People seem to spread out pretty evenly, and actually I think the distillery has been the biggest benefactor of the brewery opening, because now everyone has to walk by the distillery between the two. But it has definitely become more of a a day experience. We really don't get that many wine hopping tours around Virginia, partly because there aren't that many places around us either. We're not in the middle of Charlottesville or DC, where there's wineries, breweries within 5-10 minutes of each other. So most of the people that come out here, they arrive between 12 and 2, and they spend the afternoon. And so part of our transition here is turning more into a how do we become more of an experience-driven enterprise, I guess, because we can definitely tell over the course of the last 6 months, our to-go sales for the winery, have started to go down a little bit, just because on-site consumption has gone a lot higher, because people are coming out, I feel, with the expectation that they're coming out to spend the afternoon, they're coming out to have an experience. Not that people are worried about spending money or not spending money, but they're coming out because they're coming out for the day, just like someone that goes to a theme park or something along that nature's, they're coming out, have the experience. So how can we build those experiences in? And so that was going to be driven in 2 parts. The biggest initiative for this upcoming year being to expand upon education. And so the first iteration of what would be coming up would be these trifecta tours, which we would offer on Friday, Saturday, Sundays, and they'd be involved. It's not going to be your, you come in and, you're going on a 20, 30-minute tour and then you get to go drink. This is for the individuals that really want to delve into the process a little bit. It is the tour guide is either a member of the family or one of our production team, and you're going to spend 2 hours with us. And the thought process behind this is that there isn't a script that we go by. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. It's essentially what this interview is sort of like. We're happy to go into whatever questions that you have. If you want to know about our background, you can do that. If you want to know about our production, if you want to know about what our sales are, how we do it, how we reach the public, what our new goals are, how we do our products. If you just want the basics of alcohols made by yeast eat sugar, which creates alcohol and CO2, we're happy to do that as well. But the goal of these tours was 2 hours. We'd start with the winery, go through the vineyard a little bit, you do some sampling along the way, you jump into the distillery, and you're going into the brewery at the end, and that's where you end the day. And if you want to expand out and enjoy the rest of the afternoon, you can. But knowing that when you go on these tours, you're involved for a little bit. And so we would be launching, hopefully when we open back up, we will do some kind of a deviation off that. We're not quite sure how things are going to change or not. But the second phase of that education is then spend a day with the brewer, spend the day with the winemaker, spend a day with the distiller. And if you want to have smaller sessions and just walk behind our person, our our main producer for the afternoon, you'd be able to do that. And then the third piece being opening up week-long classes for other individuals that are looking to jump into the industry, because I feel like we have a unique perspective of wineries, breweries, distilleries across the board. Which might be better for certain people in certain areas and based on what their goals are. But there's only a handful of those classes around the United States that offer these week-long courses. And so we'd look to break into that a little bit as well. But our main thing is the very interactive, in-depth tours on Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. And we look forward to really getting that up and running.
That sounds awesome. I know what I'm going to do when everything's over. I'd love to just like spend 2 hours and see what it's all like and all the different parts. But you kind of talked about at the beginning of what you were saying there about how you guys are kind of almost alone in terms of not having another winery 5 to 10 minutes away from you, or another kind of brewery or distillery. And it kind of also, it's almost a 2-part question here that leads into almost the culture of like Virginia wine, and how Virginia wine is so different from that of, say, New York or even California or Washington State or Oregon. Virginia wine's kind of younger, and you guys don't have a lot of neighbors, I guess you could say, around you. Do you find it like you guys are trying to figure out what works best every year, like on your own, or is there kind of the culture there between Virginia winemakers and across the board? I mean, I guess Virginia spirits altogether, liquor, beer, wine, where you guys kind of come together and talk about what works best, or do you keep it close to the chest?
The industry is very friendly. I would say all three across the board. And I think part of that is due to, in fact, that over the last 20 years of Virginia winemaking, there's been a lot of transition in winemakers around Virginia. And so there are those natural relationships too, where someone has been a winemaker in Charlottesville, now in Loudon, has been through Culpeper. There's I like to think of Virginia winemaking in 2 parts. There's what I like to consider sort of the European influence, specifically France, where there is a good number of French winemakers that came over as part of a viticulture exchange program in the early 2000s. And we used it a couple times as well. And part of this exchange program is that there would be these young winemakers who had completed their viticulture education undergraduate degrees, sometimes postgraduate degrees, over in France. And then they would come over to the US and they'd spend 2 to 3 years learning a different wine region. And then after those 2 to 3 years are up, they could decide to go back to their home country and start with a vineyard there, or they could stay. And a lot of those winemakers have stayed. And so that is sort of the winemaker experience, where it's really grounded in a firm education of, what is the science, what is the chemistry, what is the soil composure that I need to go about and be a good winemaker. And then there is sort of what I like to think of as the American winemaker, who is wherever they're located, whether there's East Coast, Virginia, California, and it's I started working as a cellar rat when I was 16, and then I went out and I worked in the vineyard for 2 years, and then I became an assistant winemaker, and then I became a winemaker by just sort of going through the steps and the processes. And while there has been pieces of classes and formal education along the way, it's really a learning through doing a portion. And I would say Virginia sort of split 50-50 on how it goes. But right now, I mean, there's great resources besides the relationships, which again, I would say are very good around Virginia. I mean, pretty much all the winemakers that have been through Old House at some point, we should have an Old House wine tour feature, because you can jump around all the different wineries everyone's at. But we got hit by a pretty good frost, along with a lot of Virginia over the last week and a half. And so, as I have questions as I'm doing my own vineyard scouting, I can pick up the phone and I can call different individuals around the state, see how they did, what their recommendations are for moving forward. And, they're, happy to lend any assistance that they can. The Virginia Winery Association, they've been holding conference calls twice a week for the last month and a half. That includes all the wineries around Virginia. They keep us updated with regard to legislative changes, with regard to funding, with regard to best ways to market and advertise in these times. They want that rising tide raising all boats, floating. There are a lot of wineries in Virginia. I don't think of any of them really as a competitor. I feel like most wineries in Virginia have a very, very, very loyal faction that is all about their hometown winery, their winery that they visit. As many wineries as there are in Virginia, there's so many more people that want to go to wineries. It's not the winery down the road or 60 miles from us that's bringing in all this business. Really doesn't have very much effect on us, other than hopefully they're producing good wine, so that that the reputation of Virginia wine across the whole, when you come in, is going to be hey, it's on the uptrend.
Yeah.
But 20 years ago when we started, there was no education. There was no Virginia Tech agriculture viticulture program. While there's not tons of wineries around us, there was nobody anywhere close. And we had a really hard time getting anything to grow here on the property originally. We were sending off leaf samples to UC Davis. We were sending them off to labs in France. No one could tell us why our stuff wasn't growing. And it wasn't until someone, a good old boy from Orange down the road from us, came to look at our septic for the old farmhouse, and he got to talking with my dad, about just why stuff is or isn't growing. And the guy was like, well, the reason that nothing's growing is because all your vines are drowning, and there's too much water retention in our soil. And my dad's like, that's brilliant. We've been sending stuff out to everyone, and no one has come back and said that. So we ended up drain tiling 22 linear miles on the property. Between every row of vines, there's drain tile that leads down into our pond, and it keeps the pond full throughout the year. When we started planting the vines, it was it was probably 5 times the cost of what was originally laid out to plant everything, just because there wasn't the research exchange for these vines are what is going to be grafted onto this rootstock, which is going to grow in this soil. It was mostly we were in that phase of my favorite wine is Merlot, therefore I'm going to plant Merlot. Virginia wineries aren't like that anymore. Just with a different rootstock, different research, if you want to grow something, there's a good chance that you can grow it now in Virginia, because the resources are there. You will be able to get the information, and a lot of those missteps that a lot of wineries had to deal with through the 90s and early 2000s. that that research base is out there now. There's someone that's willing to help you. There's a lot of resources out there, and Virginia on the whole, wants more vineyards, wineries, production happening. And so if you want to plant some vines, someone will be there to help you.
So I think that kind of leads to this overarching question when it comes to Virginia wines. What makes Virginia wine different than any other region?
So Virginia's grape of choice seems to change every 5 years. For what Virginia wants to promote as the wine that if we are going out of state and you're trying to promote what is Virginia's best wine that you can go to, that tends to change. Right now it seems to be Petit Verdot is that the hot commodity, is sort of a robust version of a Cab Franc in my opinion. Before that it was Cab Franc, which I still think is Virginia's most consistent variety, and then before that it was Viognier. But one of the things that I think makes Virginia pretty unique on the wine industry as a whole is that while Virginia is I think it's the 5th largest grape producer in the United States, hold on, I'm just moving locations here so that I can plug you back in, so that my computer doesn't cut off on you.
I appreciate that.
So I think the biggest thing is that there's so many people that want to consume Virginia wine at the moment, that our production keeps on growing, but because the demand is there, almost all Virginia wine is being sold in Virginia. There's a small percentage of wineries that do have decent distribution outside the state, but for the most part, I would say it's probably up there, 90+% of Virginia wine production is sold and consumed in Virginia, which creates a pretty unusual dynamic in that Virginia wine, as much as it continues to grow, is still local. And so for probably for the considerable future, Virginia wine, while it does well in nationwide competitions, international awards, you start to hear a lot about it. It's still seen as a relatively small area because it's not distributed because it's wanted so much in its own state. Mm-hmm. And so if we can support our local areas, if we can continue to grow and the demand is still there in Virginia, we might still be seen 20 years down the road as a small player on the world stage. But I think for the most part Virginia wine is okay with that, because I think they have something special in that you have to be a Virginian to be able to enjoy Virginia wine.
That's awesome. That's a really great answer to that. It's funny because growing up in Virginia and I live in Fredericksburg, so you have so many different places you can go from here that I never really thought of Virginia wine as that local thing. And then after I graduated from college and I moved up to the New York City area, I realized just how little people knew about it as I'd go into wine shops and ask about it. And they'd look at me with this glazed over face. What? They make good wine? And then kind of have to explain it to them. But that's a really great answer. It's local. I like that. I like that way of putting it.
And I think that's okay for right now. It works for us.
Yeah. And that's all that matters. As long as it's doing its job and it's still racking up some awards and people are enjoying it, I think that's all that really matters. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. That's all the questions, the talk I have for it. I hope it was enjoyable for you. This was my first time, so it's kind of a guinea pig experiment. Hopefully, fingers crossed, things go really well. But thank you so much for agreeing to come on to this and do this with me.
I enjoyed it. I wish you the best of luck. I'm sure it's going to go well.
Thank you. You have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. Well, thank you again so much to Ryan Kearney, the general manager from Old House Vineyards. You could see his passion for it all. I mean, you don't just open a trifecta, the brewery, winery, and distillery, just on a whim. You really have to love what's going on in Culpeper, Virginia. They're doing awesome things. I urge you all to visit them. They have fantastic wines and a fantastic environment. Once all of this COVID coronavirus stuff is over and you're in the Northern Virginia area, or really any Virginia area, I urge you to go and check them out. Thank you for bearing with it all through the entire podcast. I'm very thankful. If you have any drawbacks, criticisms, anything like that, hit my line at Fitz's Fixins on Twitter. You can type in Fitz's Fixins on Facebook. Find our Facebook page. I'm also on Instagram at, you guessed it, Fitz's Fixins. And then you can email us, fitzsfixins@gmail.com. Check out our home on the web, www.fitzsfixins.com. And when I say our home on the web, I mean my home on the web, because it's just me. I'm doing everything I can to bring fun food stuff to you guys, some fun, funky wine pairings, because I love wine, I love food, so why not try the best way to get that out to you. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in. The next one, I'm not sure when the next one will be. I'm currently casting lines out to winemakers, winery owners, chefs, all like that. Casting the line out and seeing who responds and who I can get on the next episode. Once I know that, I'll let you all know. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning into the Fitz's Fixins podcast. Until next time, you all have happy eating, amazing drinking, and have a wonderful rest of your day.